Well, we reflected on some of the implications of Saudi Arabia getting to host the World Cup with David McGillivray, who's a Professor of Events and Digital Cultures at the University of the West of Scotland, and Stephen McGowan, Chief Football Writer of the Scottish Daily Mail. David, so in the end, Saudi Arabia getting the World Cup in 2034 was inevitable, wasn't it? They were the only bidders.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the story that people knew was going to come to fruition, many months ago, maybe many years ago, because the way that FIFA, the owner of this event, has kind of courted Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has courted FIFA too. So over the course of that time, the FIFA basically orchestrated it so that this bid, the 2034 award, was going to go to Saudi Arabia after the 2030 going to Portugal, Spain, Morocco and some of the South American countries. So yeah, I think it was inevitable, but I think it's probably been some problematic features about how it's got to this point in terms of just how FIFA's operated. Yeah,
and Stephen, Saudi Arabia are promising it's going to be the best World Cup ever. I mean, there's going to be huge investment into it.
They are, and there's a very good chance it will be. I mean, if you look back at the furore that rightly preceded Qatar, it was pretty much washed away by the fact, actually, I think history will show it was really a very good World Cup. Because invariably, when journalists like us become incredibly exercised by human rights abuses, rightly so, and that's why the World Cup is going to these countries, I think you find that once you get deeper into the tournament and the football's excellent, the stadiums are space age, as Saudi Arabia most certainly will be, I don't really know that the public buy into it that much. I think they tend to just focus on the football, and I think it will be quite a spectacle. And Saudi Arabia, a bit like Qatar, have become very, very good at putting these spectacles on and almost kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Yeah, I mean, and Stephen says there has been a lot of criticism, particularly over their human rights records. I mean, what are the main criticisms?
Well, I think the big problem with the hosting of the World Cup and the way in which it's been used as a way of what people call sportswashing is that it conceals and it covers up some of those issues they don't wish to be discussed. And I think that came through in the bid, where Saudi Arabia hasn't signed up to quite a few human rights declarations, and FIFA and Saudi Arabia agreed that certain areas didn't need to be covered in their assessment of human rights for this bid, for this awarding. And so areas around about LGBTQI issues, around about forced evictions, the right to have trade unions, the ability to even speak out about a regime in any way can land you in prison in Saudi Arabia, if not worse. So I think the fact that the bidding process didn't allow those issues to be covered, and there's a sense that it was a whitewash in terms of the actual assessment of human rights. It got a medium human rights appraisal, which many human rights organisations around the world have really come out, and there's been an outcry about this to say that clearly wasn't a major part of the assessment. And as we know, Saudi Arabia got a 4.2 out of 5 assessment for the World Cup, as if this was the highest score ever been given to anyone who'd been looking to host the World Cup.
And are football organisations around the world, are they at all uncomfortable about the choice of the venue? You're saying that eventually the fans are they can't do much about it. They want to watch football, but what about the footballing organisations?
Well, we've not heard a great deal from many of them. I think Norway were quite, maybe a bit outspoken about it, but football ultimately, I mean, we always say football and politics don't mix. Well, football is an entirely political sport these days. FIFA are effectively a nation state without borders. I mean, Gianni Infantino, the president, is a president in a very real sense, because of the economic clout they carry when they take a World Cup to a country. It can be, as we say, sport washing. It can be economically huge. So the football authorities will be uncomfortable about it, but it's all bargaining. For example, the UK and Ireland were supposed to be part of a joint bid for 2030, which has gone to Spain, Portugal and Morocco. But they were persuaded to step out the process because Great Britain and Ireland will now host the Euros in 2028. So there's always bargaining going on, there's always deals being done, and that tends to quell dissent. I think Gianni Infantino's approach to this really is give a little love to everyone, spread the word around the globe. I think he sees himself as a modern day Dalai Lama, who is basically spreading the love and bringing peace to the world. And unfortunately, I think you find that most football authorities tend to go along with it.
You were one of the few journalists from, I think you were the only journalist from Scotland who went to the Qatar World Cup. I mean, what was that experience like? And do you think it will be a similar experience in Saudi Arabia?
I think it will be similar. I mean, I was really struck. We used to go day after day to the National Convention Centre in Qatar. It was unusual because it was effectively just a World Cup in one city. And for the first 2 weeks, you would turn up for the press conferences for Gareth Southgate, the England manager, or Hansi Flick, who was in charge of Germany at the time, and they would be asked about One Love armbands, and they would be asked about inclusivity and diversity, and rightly the human rights record of Qatar. The Germans in particular wanted to make a big fuss about it, and they were very unhappy when FIFA told them, look, we just want you to focus on football and cut out the politics. So much so that when Germany played Japan, the Germans made this gesture, if you remember. They posted a picture where they put their hands over their mouth to signal that they had been silenced. But the real politic of it is that by the time Japan had beaten Germany in that game, people were talking about the football. And what tends to happen is that for 2 weeks, journalists and media will focus intensely on the human rights, but then the games start to take over.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's the case, David? Amnesty International is absolutely furious about it, say it's going to cost lives, and yet it will happen. And
I mean, it's definitely the case, but that's because it's part of a long-term strategy by Saudi Arabia, Vision 2030, that Mohammed bin Salman has put in place. And there are people all over the world investing in sports. They've got 400 plus sponsorships of sports all over the world, and all of that is designed as a way of actually ensuring that, for example, they would end up with this award of the 2034 World Cup, but also that people wouldn't talk about the human rights issues. So what's going to happen here is this award, unopposed, with nobody really being able to say too much about it, nothing about the human rights related issues, is going to really strengthen Saudi. So actually they've got 10 years to use this brand, and this is a very powerful brand, the FIFA World Cup, as a way of kind of extending the reach. And I think that is problematic, and I think FIFA will regret this in terms of the criticism they're going to get, because actually they did change their human rights policies for a while. It looked like they were actually producing good strategies and they were committed, and this, I think, pushes it back a long way.
But I mean, they're huge players, the Saudis, in other sports like golf as well, aren't they? I mean, massive globally.
Yeah, you see Live Golf, which has obviously divided the golfing world, and then you see boxing as well. We've seen world title bouts in Saudi Arabia, because I don't think anything quite buys them exposure and social acceptability like sport does. Because I think one of the things I was really struck by in Qatar was that supporters were coming to see individuals like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo who weren't even from those countries. So sport has a way of attracting people through the big superstars, through the big names, that almost nothing else can do. And it's quite remarkable in terms of its scope. Yeah, and
the World Cup, as we say, doesn't happen in Saudi Arabia until 2034. Another 10 years. I mean, they're already massive players. What are they going to be like in 10 years' time, David?
Yeah, and as I said, it's about changing their economy, so sport, tourism, entertainment. These are big things, and again, there's not a massive issue about any country wishing to diversify and become something else. But the key thing is you can't whitewash your human rights record in that process. And I think that's where all sporting federations have a responsibility to actually kind of at least engage in that debate and suggest that actually we have to be very careful what we actually permit in terms of the awarding of these kind of events.
And just in a sentence, even in practical terms, it will probably be in January again.
I would think so, yeah. I think it's impossible to play in summer for very practical reasons, and that will play havoc with the footballing calendar.
Yeah, well, who knows? Scotland probably won't qualify anyway. We'll have to
come on.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.